Welcome to this Futures seminar hosted by Copenhagen Institute for Futures Studies together with Fortinet. Usually when we work with the future, we start with a history of the past. I think this is the first time I've started a presentation with the Big Bang. So from the very beginning here, let's fast forward a little bit until the present. So we have invited you to this event because we do think that cybersecurity is extremely interesting, and it's extremely important to understand where the future is heading. I was introduced seriously to the field of cybersecurity when I was working as head of risk management in a large financial institution. Suddenly, we were on the front cover of every Danish newspaper because a serious incident, and I had to really understand this field of cybersecurity. And I realized that looking into our IT systems, our IT structure, it was just a deeply integrated element, and we couldn't change anything without this having seriously consequences for how this systems worked. We couldn't get on top of the security incident without actually knowing what the people were doing, how they entered the building, and so forth. So I got to learn it the hard way, how important cybersecurity is, not only for a financial institution, but it made me understand how this is actually important for the whole digital structure of society. Looking into the future, the cybersecurity element is not just a thing on the internet. The digital and the physical is basically merging together. So in the future, the element of cybersecurity is not just a question of being secure when you log into your Facebook account. It's about being secure when you walk around in society. And when we try to do our analysis about potential futures, of course, like anyone else these days, we are looking very much into the field of generative AI. And understanding how this develops is, I think, an element in almost everything we do. And I do think that if we are not getting on top of cybersecurity and understand how this evolves, we won't be able to understand the future, basically. When we discuss how the future of generative AI and the future in general evolves, I often use a very maybe banal analogy, but saying that it will be like every one of us have 1,000 butlers working for us, understanding our needs and being able to communicate with society around us. And I think it's very intriguing to think about having 1,000 butlers working for me, but I think it's really mind-boggling to think about what it could do if these 1,000 butlers could communicate with 1,000 butlers for you, and you, because then the element of time will no longer stop me from actually communicating. So it will be able to communicate about all sorts of needs. It will be able to communicate about what should the temperature be in a room, what should I order when I get here, but also what will be very specific needs and search for specific needs among you. So for example, thinking about the circular economy. When I was heading here, maybe this generative AI would say to me, bring your kids' soccer shoes. And I will bring them. I wouldn't know why. I would just bring them. When I arrived at the reception, I would place them. And suddenly there will be soccer shoes, one number larger, and maybe that would be because the generative AI knew that my kids' soccer shoes were too small. Someone else here had a similar pair and wanted to exchange. These sort of interactions, communications that will really, I would say, influence the way we communicate. But this will not work without trust. If I didn't trust the algorithm or the generative AI having secured that I was actually home before my son were heading to soccer, that these shoes were actually too small. If the generative AI suddenly bought a present for my wife that was some cooking equipment for her birthday, that would send a signal I wouldn't like to send on her birthday. And also, if this generative AI had access to my account, were able to buy stuff, I would be pretty confident that it wasn't suddenly, I don't know, buying 50 cheeseburgers at 50 different McDonald's restaurants because some kids had accessed their generative AI, hacked me, and just wanted to get some free lunch. So without trust, all this prosperous services that are waiting for us out there, this won't work. And also thinking about the digital and the physical merging together. If suddenly we were entering autonomous vehicles without being able to trust them, without knowing that maybe some kids in a foreign country had built a very real-life computer game that they were actually playing with our cars, I would be quite hesitant to walk into that car. And not even thinking about the geopolitical potential sounds like a positive word, but the threats related to this, how a sovereign state could suddenly interact with the whole physical infrastructure, and maybe even more, I think, frightening, how the access to truth, information, would suddenly can suddenly be changed, because we can use this generative AI to fake faces, voices, information. So if we are not able to trust the information we get out there, I'm quite confident that this could lead to a lot of conflict, and sovereign states will no longer know who they're up against, if this is actually a president saying something on national TV or if this is fake. So what I'm trying to say here is that I do believe that in order to understand the future society, we need to understand how the cybersecurity element will influence this. And we have given this a lot of thoughts, and we have often entered into deep conversations where we also realize, without having more deep understanding of cybersecurity, we won't be able to discuss this. And this is why we are very excited to have three experts, I will call you, each one of you, here with us today: Anette, Nicolas, and Karin. And I would like to ask you maybe to start briefly introducing yourself, and then I have a lot of questions, and hopefully this will turn into a dialogue. And if you have questions during this conversation, please raise your hand and I will engage you in the dialogue. So, Anette, yeah. Will you start?
Yes, of course. And I'm very pleased to be here in this amazing place. I have also not started with the Big Bang before, so it's really inspiring to be in this location. So my name is Anette Vainer, and I'm the managing director for Fortinet in Denmark, and Fortinet works with cybersecurity. I made a change a couple of years ago, going into this area from software, because I think it's an integral part of the sustainability we have in the world. It's not just about the environment, but it's about so much more. And security and diversity are also key elements there. And I think it's the right time that I chose for that change and be able to make some impact for a safer world.
Yeah. My name is Nicolas Gomez, and I work for the Volvo Group. I head up the information security within the Volvo Group. And for those of you who do not know the Volvo Group, that's everything but the cars. So obviously we all know the Volvo cars, right? Volvo Group is the business that we're in is within trucks, it's buses, it's construction equipment, it's boat motors, it's military, and so on and so forth. So about globally about 100,000 people and about 12 different brands. We also own Mack trucks, Renault trucks. Yeah, a big organization with lots of different things.
Yes, so my name is Karin Castro. I am a functional manager from the Danish Institute of Fire and Security Technology. I work in the security department, where we work a lot with information security, very much from the human behavior side. But the institute itself is a GTS institute, and we do a lot of research development. But we also do management consultancy for both the public and the private.
Thank you. And let's jump directly into it. And Anette, I would like to start asking you, do you think that companies are well secured for the current threat landscape?
Well, definitely not. So there are two things in that. So before the generative AI and what you talked about, they were also not secured well enough. So this is not anything to do with the current new threats that we see. But especially the smaller and medium-sized businesses in Denmark, that Denmark is like a key part of, like 99% of all companies in Denmark are below 10 employees. They're the one that have the lowest degree of security. They seem to think that they are not part of a threat, which is definitely not the case. We see most companies have been hit, and the ones that say they haven't, they just don't know it yet. So the answer is no. But this happening right now, as you say, and the reason why you're here, I think, is because there's beginning to understand that this is something that we do need to deal with. And so there's an awareness that haven't been there before, that we are all in the center, and we all should protect ourselves, also the smaller and medium-sized businesses. So we see a lot of things happening. And the good thing about the timing is that we might, include the new types of threat in that plan for a more secure workspace for everyone, which I think will happen. Yeah.
Okay, so a good thing and a bad thing. We are aware, but we are maybe not all of us well prepared. So Karin, in what way do you experience that the threat landscape is evolving?
So we are seeing that it's a very complex landscape, and it's ever more fast-paced and changing at a higher rate. The world is also more interconnected, and that brings new challenges. As to your question earlier, a challenge is often that, yes, we are looking at the tech side. Perhaps in some capacity we're looking more and more at the awareness side. But we often see that you forget about the physical security side. And it's sort of that holistic view that's necessary to face this new, or perhaps not new, but accelerated threat landscape.
Mm. And that's one of the reasons you're here, Nicolas, the physical security side. As I said, this seems, for me at least from the outside, a rather new thing that all things physical is also becoming digital. So what's your take on this? And maybe if we take the high perspective and the national security landscape, the geopolitical tensions, is that something working in Volvo Group you see evolving?
I think the cyber physical aspect is really interesting, where you have, beforehand you would have not as much, the physical things being, more or less managed by digital things, and now everything's connected to the internet, or most of it is, or being connected, so with the IoT and so on. So for us, this is of course really relevant, because what we have is physical. We're in the transport business as well, where we have physical trucks and so on that are where you have from 6 years ago there would be probably minimal computers in it, and now is to a large degree. And when we look into the future, where autonomous driving as well is something that we're also working on and testing and so on, then that becomes like a big deal with cybersecurity within that aspect, right? Because what we've seen, if we take it to the most extreme degree, of course, is that we've seen terrorist attacks where people they jump in, they hijack a truck, they drive into a big area with a large population to try to hit as many people as possible, right? So if you would look many years into the future, I don't know how many it is, if we do have autonomous driving trucks, cars, whatever it might be, you would be able to launch an attack like that purely over the internet or via cyber attacks, right? You would be able to hijack a vehicle. You would be able to, if it's not secured properly, drive into a big mass of people, and you would even maybe be able to do it in scale, right? So do coordinated attacks, just sitting from your computer in whatever country, whatever hideout you're sitting in, depending on who you are as an attacker, right? And that's of course a chilling threat, but something that we of course need to take into consideration when we talk about cyber, especially when we go into and secure some of these physical entities, so to say, right? So there's a lot of things that we on the cyber physical side really need to make sure are secured properly.
In my understanding, if you were to do this up until now, you need to really be on top of your game in knowing cybersecurity and knowing how to hack and so forth. But it also appears to me that the new tools, the new AI tools out there, would suddenly allow maybe even a guy like me to actually understand how to approach this and actually develop serious attacks towards this. What's your reflections around this?
I think, of course, probably talking about generative AI. I think there's a lot of happened that in the last couple of years within that field, and it's super exciting. But of course, also a little chilling on what we see. The current, you can say, ChatGPT and these types of services are actually able to provide of information. So I think you're right. They will. These types of services will be able to automate and without you having to have a big amount of skill, give you good knowledge about how to do things. And I think that's definitely something that's also accelerating the threat landscape, right? You will be able to already now you can use ChatGPT to generate code, tell it to generate code that does X, Y, Z, and it will do that. And what I hear, the quality of course is varying, but it's becoming better and better, especially with the new version that's just out. And if you take that and you roll that forward, then you would be able to probably use an AI agent like that as a sparring partner in how to attack this type of you can say service, this type of company, this type of architecture, and then get it to create exploits to exploit the operating system, the networks and so on, and that's of course something that we could foresee in the future. being a larger part of, helping people, that are not so skilled, as you said, but can actually create a pretty harmful impact.
But on the other hand, of course, you, the good guys here, would also have access to this generative AI. And I don't know, Anette, this appears for me to be an arms race. So who's winning in this arms race? Is it becoming easier to protect yourself or more difficult?
So, I think it requires a new thinking. So it requires a change of paradigm, where we thought it was like a force and a war house to house. Then it's different. So you need to think more holistically, more platform, more. And you mentioned, Karin, that there were things today that were left out. That's not how the future will be when you think about securing it. You'll think much more systems and platforms, and they will also have access to the same AI tools. They already have that today, and that will be more sophisticated. So they interconnect and they exchange information amongst each other. So an attack over here will instantly update the rest of the chain, and I think we'll see much more cooperation across, both across vendors, but also across industries. So we secure that information becomes available to all good guys. We see that already happening now. We have like a big, we call it FortiGuard. So we have like a big institution that collects all of these data across from all the equipment around the world, and make sure that the zero incident will immediately become available to everyone else, and not only everyone else that are customers today, but across these new alliances that are coming up in new vendors. So the thinking is that you don't fight new technology with old equipment. So if there's a change happening, and it's not the first time in the world and the existence, well, a change has happened, we just need to lean in and say, well, that requires me to change. It requires my organization to change, and see that there are not only smart people on one side of the fence, but maybe they have strong alliances on the right side of the fence than they have on the other side, where they are more fragmented and more at war than we would be on the good side of the fence.
And seen from a more national state geopolitical point of view, what are the tensions we see here? I mean, this is a big question thrown to you, Karin, but the future of war in cybersecurity, how's that evolving? Big question, sorry.
Big question. Well, I think I would actually like to dial it back to your point. I think it's all about sharing. We need knowledge sharing. We need cooperation. On the geopolitical scene, we can see that international security politics, are increasing with everything that's going on in the world, right? And I think at the same time as we are seeing this more interconnected world, we're also seeing nations pulling back. So it's this sort of counteractive force where at one hand we see more countries joining together in alliances and so on and so forth to exactly that, help each other, protect the nations. And at the same time, we are seeing decentralization. So I think it's a very interesting point where we also see more hybrid warfare in terms of that digital non-digital divide. So I think, again, it's about thinking holistically on it and being aware of all the different fronts we need to be working on. And we need to defend ourselves and actually be progressive as well, and do everything we can to prepare ourselves. So we do a lot of preventive work, right? And I think that's really, really important. But we also need to have contingency plans. We also need to be prepared and plan for what are we going to do when something happens, because it's no longer, as you said, if, it's when.
And I cannot help drawing a comparison to the physical pandemic we've just been through. And the story has been that all the experts said this will happen eventually. And then when it happened, no one were really prepared. So my question, and that will be actually to each one of you, will we have a global digital pandemic within soon? And are we prepared? Who's
Big
first?
question.
Again, big question, but I think we should be prepared. I think, and we see these tendencies as well. Business continuity management is winning forth. You know, we're thinking more and more about organizational resilience, system resilience, so on and so forth. And I think we should be working on the different potential future scenarios, good and bad. We should be red teaming. We should be doing everything we can on all fronts. And perhaps instead of thinking only about one single threat, we should be more open to the various combination of threats that might hit us. And opportunities as well. You know, it's not only that. Risk, you know, it's one part danger, one part opportunity. And every time we develop something new, we open up to new vulnerabilities. So it's kind of a two-sided coin.
I think you have to try to look a little bit more at some of the risks that you would say would be totally unlikely previously, right? Start to look at, okay, is there actually, you know, if things are connected, you know, is there actually a likelihood of this happening, right? And I think your point with, you know, threat intelligence, you know, sharing information is extremely important. If you have to, you know, when we have such a rapid development in types of attacks and so on, it needs to be flawless. You can say the sharing of threat intel amongst, you know, governments, you know, companies, whatever.
Yeah, and thinking about the question, I think it has already happened. So we are not starting at this, you know, the same point. And I think the fact that it's happening in the pace it happens, and for so many, makes it okay to talk about. So we have this knowledge sharing. Most of us remember Maersk, and when that happened, it was like the first time it was at that scale. And I think they did something very clever about being so open about both what happened, how unprepared they were, that there were no contingency plan, there was no business continuity plan, that it was like they couldn't even enter the building because the physical entering was digital, and if they couldn't use the access card, they couldn't, you know, had no access control. So that information, I think, started a trend that if they can share their vulnerability and what happened, then it's okay for everyone to share. And that makes everyone better prepared. And the small businesses might be as open as we don't want them to be, but I think that awareness that you need to invest and you need to think holistically is there, and the tools are evolving at the same pace as everything else. So I actually think we are already in a pandemic, and we are actually taking actions in the right directions.
So it's a pandemic with a lot of different vira.
Yeah.
What's the now? I'm asking you to fill out your risk radar here. The risk of suddenly the access to the internet, for example, is gone for Danes. Is that a potential or a plausible risk?
To shut down the internet?
Yeah, so I mean, just to keep in the comparison with the physical pandemic, suddenly we couldn't access physical stores. Now someone is asking me, okay, can the same thing happen to my web shop?
Yes. To the web.
Probably to your web shop. I don't think that can definitely happen. I don't think you will see I think it's very unlikely that you have a scenario where everyone in Denmark cannot access the internet in some way or the other, because there's so many types of ways to get on the internet, so many different types of communications that are being developed. Right, Starlink with Elon Musk is creating Starlink. It doesn't matter in which country you're in, right, and so on and so forth. So I don't think my guess is we'll probably not be in a situation like that, but there could be large parts of our infrastructure within Denmark that could possibly be, you can say, attacked and pulled down and not available. That's probably more likely.
Okay, and now I know, having sneak peeked a little bit on the participants, I know there is a lot of interesting backgrounds for you guys. So if you have any questions that you think is actually even more or a lot more interesting than mine, please raise your hand and join. Yes. Okay, I'll come down. Yes, please speak up with your name and your background and the question.
My name is Mark. I am just curious about security and cybersecurity, and I'm into crypto. So I was wondering, are we ready for central bank digital currencies on a security level?
Yeah, I can see, Nicolas, you have an answer for that.
You mean if we're ready for complete digital currency? If we are secure enough? Well, I mean, if you look at crypto over the last years, obviously it's been gone up and down in popularity, but in order for it, I think, to be secure, then we unfortunately need some regulation, right? Because a lot of the exchanges that we see being hacked, where a lot of money has been stolen, it's not always that they have to live up to the same regulations as a normal bank. So I don't know if a state could probably create their own crypto, and that would probably work. But having the open landscape of all types of cryptocurrencies being valid, and you could use that, probably takes a little more time, I think.
I think there are definitely examples of crypto valuta being secure, where you have backing in a physical bank, and you have the right corporations behind, and some are you can buy them in normal banks, and there are secure examples. I think the problem is the lack of regulation and the lack of visibility on what's to trust and what's not to trust. And then I think there's a big problem around how it's used. Some places it's used to back sustainability and the investment of windmill parks, and have a totally fine economy of its own. But it's still, it's down to, I think, also what kind of stable coin you're using there. It's a big question and a complex answer, I think.
Yeah, we have other questions. There were one down here.
Thank you very much. My name is Jeremy Donat from the Embassy of Switzerland here. So my question is a bit in a larger scale, but you mentioned the internet pandemic, and then you, Nicolas, mentioned that you cannot imagine that all Denmark would be without internet. My question goes more into critical infrastructure and cyber, this connection between digitalization and physical security. So in the last couple of days, there was a lot going on about maritime critical infrastructure in Denmark. And one main part of it is that basically Denmark is an important hub for undersea water cables, especially when it's connected to the US, etc. And my question goes into the direction, what is cyber contributing? I mean, if you cut a cable, that's something else, but what is the cyber threat, cyber espionage, but also the contribution of the industry, maybe inter-exchange with the government also to this threat, because cyber can basically also take away the internet in Denmark, and we see it in Bornholm maybe also. So this is what would be a bit my question in this direction, as you see cyber, undersea water cable, or maritime critical infrastructure.
Who is trying to get Karin?
Yeah, perhaps I can give it a stab. I think we're back to sort of international governance, and we are back to, I mean, if we look, there are 2 new directives out, which are currently being interpreted into the Danish law and other European laws as well, the CER directive and the NIS2. And I think that's a very good step in the right direction, because, you know, it puts some rules, some regulations, some demands on various actors within the critical infrastructure. I think one of the challenges is that today public-private partnerships are very much a big thing about critical infrastructure, and I think the sort of to make a rule set where you at least can say, okay, as a minimum we need to do this. You know, not only does it sort of frame what you need to do, but it also sets a kind of a minimum standard. And especially these 2 new directives, their reporting demands within them are something quite advanced as opposed to what we've seen before. So I think that's definitely a step in the right direction.
And we had one more question down here.
Hi, Thomas Schuby. I work at Business Continuity and Resilience at Oslo. So if you want to talk cable cuts, I'm here. When we talk about this merge of physical and cyber, it's often a physical consequence of a cyber event. Is there room to flip it around? We do a lot of work with island mode or physical separations of our assets. So if we are attacked or a cable is cut, we can operate as an independent asset and still keep the electricity on. Is there, how are we ahead of our time, or is it a futile effort for a smaller or medium company to protect themselves in a physical way from cyber? Have you seen that?
Well, I think it's relevant for all of us. So I think definitely that's some of the ways that we're all thinking these days. So we are connecting it. So one of these thinking about the platform and things being connected. So it's a risk when everything's connected, but it's also an opportunity. And you can actually build that also into physical actions. So if this happened, cut off power here, isolate yourself, and rules and mechanisms and AI that actually have physical influence when an attack happens. So definitely, and I think it's even more in your area.
Yeah, I think here the continuity plans, you know, and the how response plans, and if different scenarios occur, that's where that really comes in, and is really relevant, right? You have to take in and look at the risks. Let's see which ones can, via cyber get into the physical, and then the response is probably a physical response to that, right? If it does materialize. So I think that's really very relevant.
But I think that's also why it's so important that we have these conversations and that we try these different scenarios. So actually, I mean, physically as well, in terms of testing. Do our pen testing, but do our scenario planning and do our scenario drills as well to see, okay, what actually happens when we do it. A while back, we heard there was a lot of talk about brownouts, and so far, there's not been many on brownouts yet, but I think it's thinking about those things and actually trying it out.
What is a brownout?
So it's a planned shut-off of electricity.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I think there's a lot of talk about legislation and the standards and so forth. We have recently heard all over the news that there's a lot of clever people actually saying that we needed to pause the development of generative AI to get on top of this, to get on top of the legislation. Now, I know this is not directly cybersecurity, but I think it's very much related to this. What's your opinion on this? Do we need to take a pause to get on top of legislation here? Jump in.
I mean, I can try. I understand why they would say that, because a lot of, the development is really happening rapidly, and it seems a little bit like it's getting out of control. But I also think that it's not realistic to stop the development of AI, machine learning, deep learning models, and so on. What will happen if you have a few big countries that agree to do it? What would the others do, right? They would keep on developing, and especially probably the ones that do not necessarily have the right ethics in place that you would normally say, and they would simply just continue. What I would probably maybe flip it a bit and then say, okay, maybe we should think more about how to protect our data that the models are using, and try to focus on that instead, because the models will be, will develop and they will become smarter and smarter and smarter, but they also need data to train on, to learn whatever they're supposed to, right? So I would probably rather say, there should be a bigger push for how to protect our own data, so we can decide when it's supposed to be a part of the training of the new big ChatGPT algorithm for whatever.
I think the ask also comes out of trying to fix things the same way we work today. So the pandemic was a very good example of how fast things can go if we focus on them, and that's also what's needed here. It's a new threat, or it's an accelerated threat. So maybe some resources has to be reassigned. You talked about your directives, and I think it's an example of how much policies and regulations will have, how much power that will have in the future. But at the same time, we haven't even drilled down in Denmark who's going to be covered, how much the municipalities have any responsibilities there, what is critical infrastructure. So some areas are obvious, but then there's a big part where, okay, if we can just on paper decide that that's not critical, then all the threats will go away. That's not really how it works. So I think there needs to be a paradigm shift in the thinking. It's not about, if we get more time, then we'll do it right. It's about rethinking how we do deal with it. And should it only be one that might know a little about it in the corner that works with the directive, or should it be at the core of everything that company does? Because if it's critical, then it's critical. Then they have to rethink everything they do there with those glasses. So you building
autonomous driving vehicles. Yeah.
You should think security in all the, and I'm sure you do that because that's how you work. Yeah. But we need to do that the same way when we build our roads and when we build our energy and all the critical infrastructure we have. It has to be part of how we develop our businesses going forward, and we are not there yet.
No. To which extent do you think that dealing with cybersecurity is I would say a threat, an element in preventing companies from innovating, moving faster, and actually coping with what is to come? Karin?
It comes back to risk and risk acceptance, right? I mean, yeah, you can do the digital steam train and not think about anything about security. I wouldn't advise that in any way, shape, or form. But if you're willing to take those and accept those risks, then by all means. But I think what is important here is that we need to think of security at top management level, because it has so much to do with budgeting and anchoring it and making sure that we have the right resources and we have the mandate to do something about everything, and it's just so important because that way we can turn security into a business enabler as opposed to being an internal cost, and that way I think we can work with and adapt to this digital development in a good organic way.
I think it's an extremely important point with the top management, the zone at the top, right? Really emphasizing that it has to be part of the way you do business, right? Because I think there's a lot of things 10 years ago that you would never think would be a risk, which it is now, and it will probably be like that in 10 years again, right? So if you don't have the focus, and if you don't, invest in saying that has to be part of our ticket to play, then there's probably some pretty big risk that'll materialize down the way.
Yes, and it's about being informed, right? So it's about being informed enough to take the decisions. So then it's up to you, what you're willing to accept or what you're not, but at least you've made a decision. You're not going in blind.
And now I'm trying also to together with you think a little bit about some of the scenarios I introduced, the future of AI and the future of say intelligent systems that are communicating on our behalf, making decisions, purchases, all this stuff. In my understanding, simplistic understanding, this requires that systems are able to communicate with each other. So we need actually to be willing to open up for accessing information across systems and so forth. Is this happening anytime soon, or do you see obstacles actually pausing this development? Again, a vague and big question, but this is all I got. Annette?
I thought it was your job to predict the future, not mine.
No. And that's the easy part. This is how we do it. We ask a lot of questions.
Well, I hope that that policies and regulations will have even more power than it has today, and that we are ready to deal with it in the right way. And I don't think that we will put pauses on the development. I think we will, because so much of the research and development is happening in the big companies that have a reputation to think about, and this is very much a trust and reputation game that we are in. We have seen the lack of trust, how much impact that can have on companies, and that in itself, and the whole reporting on ESG parameters, where cybersecurity and is part of that, will bring a demand from all of us, from all the consumers, that we behave in a good way, and then we'll put these requirements on ourselves in the research and development. So it's not about who decides. This is about all of us, because trust will be a really, really big currency in the future, and I think it already is, and that will regulate. You have to be a good citizen when you're in cooperation.
Karin, Nicolas, your take on do we have the prudeness to regulate ourselves and actually not, I would say, do stuff that will have these big risks to society because we are afraid of our reputation?
I mean, honestly, I think we've seen examples of both already, right? So we've seen examples where companies have chosen a open risk communication strategy, or companies have chosen to do crisis communication proactively as opposed to reactively. In speaking to various companies and entities we work with, it is a concern where they say, should we share, that we've been attacked, or should we share that we have a security vulnerability, or so on and so forth. And I think I don't really have an answer, because of course, some of it perhaps you can share so we can learn from it. But of course, we have to be realistic and say also, sometimes if it's sensitive company information or if it's classified information, then of course there's a limit to what we can share and what we want to share. So I think it's something that we should continue to discuss, but I'm not necessarily sure that we end up with one conclusive answer.
I think I agree. I think it's, trust is a big element here, right? And I think the classification of what type of data is it that you want to share, or that you want to, you can say, be able to share with other parties. So I think it's a lot about, which forums do you share which data with, right? So I think that's probably what I think it comes down to. There are some parts that you can share widely, and there's other ways. You have a closed, let's say, closed ecosystem of very trusted partners, where you have even more data that you share or communicate about, and I think that will probably be what we'll see.
To agree again with you, but we see we also sponsor and we also have various network activities as part of what we do at DBI, and I see this increasingly, that, like you said, these small networks of like-minded people that are sharing the same challenges and experiences, but where it can be discussed offline. We're seeing that more and more. People like to meet, and sometimes in classified environments, and sometimes not. But at least it's not online. So I think that's an interesting thing.
Okay, continuing to push a little bit some of the difficult questions here. So we also hear a lot about again, generative AI generating fake news, generating fake faces, communications, and so forth. Speaking about trust, how do you see this evolving? Do we have the tools to ensure that what we watch on TV, on the internet, and so forth, that this is actually coming from the ones we think is communicating?
So I think we should all think in how we educate ourselves and also our children. I think like being critical to a digital world is something we have to start early, and we have to rethink some of the how we saw the world before, and it takes a little time. But hopefully we'll meet it in a different way, and there's still some. It's all back to trust again. What are our sources? Who can we believe? And are we in our closed ecosystems? I don't think cybersecurity research can solve this. I think it's a much bigger impact than just cybersecurity and that, and I think we should all here that are interested in this subject go back home and talk to our children about how do we stop from being in these echo chambers and only listen to people of our own opinion. How do we secure diversity? How do we secure that we are critical to information? It's a much bigger subject, but I think we have to figure it out. Otherwise, we'll not have a good, world to live in.
I think there's also going to be a development in the cybersecurity tools, right? Because you have, as you said, deep fakes. If you saw, let's say, 3 years ago, there would maybe be a software where you would need to, tell it 30 different words. Then it would generate your voice, and it sounded a bit like you, and but if you were a little smart, if you knew a little bit about technology, you would say, okay, something's wrong, right? Now you can simply take like 6 seconds of a recording from YouTube from a person, and you can impersonate that person, right? So I think what we will probably see is increasingly tools that get built into our existing tools that can show you if something is AI generated. So let's take an example, for instance, years ago, we had the CEO fraud, right, where a person in the company gets called up, impersonates as an executive or the CEO from a company, and just convinces the person to quickly wire some money. Right? Now you would probably have some person calling you up on Teams, and it's the executive that's actually just having a conversation with and please telling you to do whatever for that person, transfer money and so on, and you would not be able to see the difference basically. So I think in some of these instances, that's probably where you can say we'll probably see some, hopefully see some cyber tools that can go in and say, okay, it detected that this is actually an AI generated or manipulated, you can say, conversation. So you can hopefully go in and respond. But I do think also when we talk about the less tech-savvy people, they're definitely going to be vulnerable to these types of things, misinformation, these types of deep fake schemes and so on. Right? I heard, and I don't know if that's fake, but I've heard a couple of stories actually about people receiving calls, typically a mother, and then it was their daughter in the telephone that was saying, I've been kidnapped, please, and it was the daughter's voice, and then you get the kidnapper on the phone saying that we have your daughter, blah blah, send money and so on and so forth, and they could basically couldn't recognize if it was. I mean, she didn't know if it was not her daughter, right? Because it was so realistic, right? And basically, you can say the kidnapper, obviously, he did not have the daughter, right? But he could make the daughter say whatever he wants because it's artificial.
Just having that experience is
exactly
traumatizing.
Yeah. So we'll probably see things, unfortunately, in that part. And if you're not tech savvy, and you don't know, some of these things, then you're quite vulnerable.
Yeah. Karin?
Yeah, but I think absolutely agree with the whole critical thinking. But actually that's why I think trust but verify. Multi-factor authentication, training your employees that are non-technical, but actually also the ones who are technical, because they typically, have other vulnerabilities. So it's all about, looking at it systematic, designing the security solution as a system, and training it. The implementation, one thing is designing it, another thing is implementing it, and making sure that it's, the security culture itself is really, really, ingrained in your organization.
And continuously testing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, and to your point, Karin, it's also about finding the opportunities in this. So remember, if your boss or your spouse or whatever tells you to do something and you forget it, just say that you thought it was deep fake. That would be my advice. And that would be actually, not the future advice to follow this, but I think I'm extremely happy about the feedback and the takeaways we got from the three of you. So thanks a lot. And I do think that maybe we didn't get all the answers for how the future looked like, but we touched upon a lot of the most critical questions that we need to understand in order to understand how where the future is heading. So thanks a lot for everyone to look by today. We will stay afterwards to have a conversation. And once again, thanks a lot for joining this panel. It was a pleasure.